A DDR5 module rolled off a production line in Hefei, China in 2023. 4 inches of green printed circuit board, 8 black memory chips, 1 gold edge connector. The company that built it, CXMT, is either the most disruptive force in memory since Samsung dismantled the American and Japanese incumbents in the 1990s, or an elaborately subsidized copy shop that cannot approach the real Duopoly's level where it counts. The bullish case holds that CXMT has cracked DDR5, undercuts the incumbents on price, and is scaling faster than the export control regime can close the door. The skeptical case answers that shipping a module is not the same as shipping a reliable module at volume, and that every number CXMT releases arrives without an independent auditor's signature. The export control regime that was supposed to end China's memory ambitions by choking off advanced lithography instead forced CXMT to prove which parts of the DRAM stack it could own without foreign tools. The contest that should have been decided in the first round is the one that made the fight worth watching. 4 rounds, that one module from Hefei as the exhibit, and a judge who is not on either payroll. The first claim on the table is the most basic one. Does the product exist? Does it ship? And does it meet the specification printed on the box? CXMT's own announcements, corroborated by supply chain analysts tracking Hefei fab output, placed DDR5 production at volume beginning in 2023, with output climbing into the hundreds of millions of chips per quarter by late 2024, per estimates from firms including TrendForce and Counterpoint Research, who cite contacts in the supply chain. Those are analyst estimates from industry sources, not audited figures. And the distinction matters. What is independently observable is that CXMT's DDR5 modules have appeared in Chinese retail distribution and have been sold to domestic personal computer assemblers. The module is not a prototype. It is a product with a price sticker. The counterclaim arrives immediately. Shipping DDR5 is not the same as shipping DDR5 at competitive yield. Samsung and SK Hynix have spent years optimizing extreme ultraviolet lithography-enabled process nodes to push die sizes down and yields up. CXMT is working with older, deep ultraviolet tooling. The export control wall around extreme ultraviolet is real, publicly confirmed, and documented by both ASML and Dutch government officials who have restricted those scanner sales to Chinese customers since 2019, with successive tightenings. Older tooling means lower cell density per wafer, larger die per bit, fewer chips from each wafer run. Supply chain analysts who track fab output suggest CXMT's DDR5 yields remain below the incumbents, though the precise gap has not been published in any verified form. A module that ships at low yield is a proof of concept. It becomes a business when the yield curve normalizes. The node CXMT is using for its DDR5 production is reported by both the company and industry analysts to be in the 17 to 19 nanometer class. SK Hynix is operating on nodes described as being below 15 nanometers, enabled by extreme ultraviolet lithography. The architectural gap is real. Its precise cost consequence in yield is inferred rather than directly measured because no independent process audit of CXMT's fab has been published. The skeptics are raising a credible concern, but they are not yet landing a verified blow. This round goes to CXMT, narrowly. The module is real. It ships. It is DDR5 by the Joint Electron Device Engineering Council specification. The yield caveat is serious and unresolved. A contested capability is still a capability, and the first round belongs to the challenger. The second round is the price argument, and it cuts in 2 very different directions depending on which question is being asked. CXMT's DDR5 modules have appeared in Chinese distribution channels at prices that industry pricing trackers and procurement reports from Chinese personal computer assemblers suggest run 20 to 40% below Samsung and SK Hynix equivalents in the domestic market. Those figures come from market reports by firms including TrendForce and DRAM Exchange, not from independently audited transaction records, and the distinction is again material. If those numbers hold, CXMT is competing on the oldest lever in the commodity business. Dynamic random access memory is a commodity. Price wins in commodities when the specification is close enough. The counterclaim is structural. A discount that is 100% underwritten by state capital is not a competitive price. It is a transfer payment with a data sheet attached. Capital expenditure for a dynamic random access memory fabrication facility runs into the tens of billions of dollars. CXMT's funding has come substantially from government-linked investment vehicles whose reported contributions are documented in Chinese regulatory filings. The China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, sometimes called the Big Fund, has been a financing source for CXMT and entities in its orbit. The precise subsidy per chip is not calculable from public data because CXMT does not publish cost breakdowns at that level of granularity. What is established is that the price is lower in the domestic market. Why it is lower, and whether it is sustainable without continued state support, is a structural question the available data cannot fully close. If the subsidy is disciplined by trade action or withdrawn, the discount disappears, and with it, the entire competitive lever the bullish case is resting on. This round is a split. On the immediate commercial question, is the module cheaper right now in the Chinese market? CXMT wins. On the structural question, is this a durable cost advantage or a subsidized loss leader? The skeptics win the argument even without a number to prove it. The round goes to CXMT on the immediate fact, but the judge marks the margin as sharply contested. The third round is where the adjudication turns structural, and it is the one that matters most for the long-run verdict. The bullish claim is that CXMT modules meet the Joint Electron Device Engineering Council DDR5 electrical specification at the die level, that the company has not reported major field failure campaigns, and that consumer personal computer assemblers in China have integrated CXMT memory without publicized mass recalls. At the entry-level client tier, which does not demand the error correction intensity of a data center server, the quality bar is lower, and CXMT's product appears to clear it. The skeptics answer with the fact that the bullish case has no direct rebuttal to enterprise and hyperscale buyers, the customers who drive dynamic random access memory economics at the margin, have not adopted CXMT memory in any publicly documented deployment. Server memory demands sustained error rates measured in failures per billion device hours, rigorous reliability, availability, and serviceability features, and multi-year reliability guarantees that only come from a vendor with a deep field dataset. CXMT has been producing DDR5 for a short time. It does not have a long-term reliability record that an independent buyer can inspect. Reports from procurement consultants indicate that major cloud operators have not qualified CXMT modules as of this Scripps research, though no cloud operator has published a formal exclusion. The burden in high-stakes hardware procurement is on the supplier to demonstrate qualification, not on the buyer to prove disqualification. Specification compliance for DDR5 is a public standard that any manufacturer can claim, and CXMT has claimed. Independent reliability comparisons between CXMT and incumbent modules in a controlled, peer-reviewed, or industry-standard benchmarking framework have not been published. Consumer anecdote from domestic personal computer builds is not a server reliability benchmark. The absence of a documented hyperscale qualification is reported by procurement analysts. That absence is not a proof of failure, but it is a proof of absence of the thing the reliability argument requires. And in this segment of the market, the absence of proof and the proof of absence produce the same commercial outcome. The buyer does not qualify the part. This round goes to the skeptics, and it is not close. Reliability in dynamic random access memory is not a specification on a datasheet. It is an accumulated field data set measured across millions of device hours in mission-critical environments, curated over years of close supplier-buyer relationships with hyperscale customers who have operational skin in the game. CXMT has not had the time to build that data set. No independent body has validated what it does have. The consumer personal computer market tolerates a wider error band. The enterprise market, which accounts for roughly 40 to 50% of dynamic random access memory revenue by most analyst estimates, does not. Until CXMT publishes reliability data that competes with SK Hynix and Micron's accumulated server qualification records, and until an independent lab verifies it, the judge cannot award this round to Hefei. The fourth round is the trajectory argument, and it is the most contested in the entire scorecard because it requires the judge to rule on a direction rather than a position. CXMT's roadmap, as described in its own technical disclosures and reported by Chinese semiconductor industry media, targets nodes below 17 nanometers, and is developing patterning approaches that use multiple deep ultraviolet exposure passes to achieve finer resolution than a single pass allows. This technique is not theoretical. It is established semiconductor process engineering used by the incumbents themselves in earlier generations. It trades throughput for resolution, meaning each wafer takes longer to process, but it can achieve smaller feature sizes than a single deep ultraviolet exposure without access to extreme ultraviolet tools. The company has recruited aggressively from incumbent dynamic random access memory makers, and Chinese academic and research institutions are publishing at an increasing rate on process techniques relevant to advanced memory cell design. The counterclaim is precise. Multi-pass deep ultraviolet patterning carries a throughput penalty that compounds at scale. Each additional mask pass slows the fabrication facility, increases the probability of introducing a defect, and raises per wafer cost. The incumbents are not standing still. Samsung and SK Hynix are progressing through extreme ultraviolet generations that do not carry that throughput penalty. The absolute gap between CXMT's process and the incumbents may be widening in physical terms, even as CXMT improves on its own trajectory. A faster runner who starts from farther behind can still lose ground if the leader is also accelerating. Running a dynamic random access memory node roadmap without extreme ultraviolet lithography is like building a skyscraper with scaffolding instead of a crane. The floors can still go up, but each one takes longer and costs more, and at some height, the approach hits a practical ceiling that no amount of additional passes on the scaffolding can overcome. ASML's restriction from selling extreme ultraviolet systems to Chinese customers is documented, confirmed publicly by ASML and by the Dutch government, and has been progressively tightened since 2019. That ceiling is not a forecast. It is a documented physical constraint on the tools available to CXMT's engineers today. CXMT's specific node targets come from the company's own statements and from Chinese industry reporting. They have not been independently verified by a third-party process audit. No teardown laboratory has published a cross-section analysis of CXMT's DDR5 die that would allow a direct physical measurement of cell size against the incumbents. That is a genuine gap in the public record. This round goes to CXMT on trajectory rather than current position, but the skeptics hold a lien on this verdict. The company is improving faster than it was, on a tool set it did not choose and cannot upgrade through normal commercial channels. If the extreme ultraviolet ceiling is reached before CXMT closes the density gap enough to remain cost competitive in the segments that matter, the trajectory argument collapses. The judge awards this round with a formal caveat. Revisit in 24 months, when at least one additional generation of CXMT process data will be in the public record. Now the decisive round. Reliability is where this contest turns structural rather than tactical, and it is worth naming the 3 strongest reasons the judge's verdict in round 3 could be wrong. The first is that CXMT's reliability gap could close faster than the scorecard assumes if Chinese hyperscale operators, the largest domestic cloud platforms, qualify CXMT modules for their own infrastructure under political pressure or economic incentive. These are not small buyers. A completed qualification from a top-tier Chinese cloud operator would constitute a real field data set in a mission-critical environment, measured across the kind of device hours that matter. Reports suggest this qualification process is underway, though no completion has been publicly confirmed. The proof gap is exact and decisive. Underway and completed are different facts, and the distinction determines whether round 3 gets rescored. The second reason is that the node gap between CXMT and the incumbents may be smaller than the public record suggests. Semiconductor process nodes are marketing labels, not physical measurements. A company can describe a process as a particular node class and have a physical cell size that differs from what the label implies, in either direction. If independent teardown analysis were to show CXMT's effective cell size is closer to the incumbents than the reported node numbers suggest, the yield and density penalty underlying the reliability argument would be smaller than the skeptical case assumes. No such teardown analysis has been published. Until a laboratory measures the actual cell geometry, the node comparison rests on company claims and analyst inference. This is a genuine unknown in the public record, not a settled question. The third reason is that the extreme ultraviolet ceiling is a real physical constraint, but not a fixed one. China's domestic lithography development is active, centered on domestic tool developers and affiliated research institutions. There is a non-zero probability that advances in domestically produced high numerical aperture, deep ultraviolet or hybrid systems narrow the gap before CXMT reaches the architectural limit of multi-patterning. National strategic priority and sustained capital allocation have closed hardware gaps of comparable magnitude before in other domains. The proof gap here is large. Chinese domestic lithography remains well behind ASML's extreme ultraviolet systems by every publicly available benchmark. The gap is documented and substantial. Treating a policy objective as a near-term demonstrated outcome would require evidence that does not yet exist. Any one of these three, a completed hyperscale qualification, a teardown showing a smaller cell size gap, or a domestic lithography advance beyond current benchmarks, would force a rescore of round 3 and potentially the overall verdict. None of them has happened yet. The synthesis is not dismissive. The verdict in round 3 is not immune to revision, but revision requires facts, not projections. Across the full scorecard, CXMT wins 2 rounds, loses 1, and holds a provisional lead in the 4th. The DDR5 module from Hefei is a real product at a real discount, improving on a real roadmap with documented direction, if not verified node precision. The DRAM Duopoly, Samsung and SK Hynix, with Micron as the American anchor of the 3-firm order, retains the decisive advantage where it matters most commercially. The enterprise and hyperscale segment, where a reliability history is the admission ticket, and CXMT does not yet have the years required to buy one. The contest is not over. It is in the middle rounds, and the outcome of the next 24 months of fab data and qualification decisions will determine whether the current scorecard holds. The export control regime that was designed to keep China out of advanced dynamic random access memory instead clarified exactly which parts of the stack China had to build independently and on what timeline. CXMT did not arrive at DDR5 because the restrictions failed. It arrived at DDR5 because the restrictions forced a different path through the problem. Slower in some dimensions, surprisingly capable in others. The round that was designed to end the fight is the one that taught the challenger how to fight without the tools the incumbents assumed were indispensable. That 4-inch module from Hefei is not a replica of a Samsung part. It is a different object, built by a different process, for a different initial market, improving toward a destination that the incumbents are also moving toward, and moving fast. Whether CXMT arrives before the extreme ultraviolet ceiling becomes binding is the question this scorecard cannot yet answer. Neither can anyone else with the data currently in the public record. The duopoly set the rules of the game. CXMT is learning to win a different one. Round 3 is where the judge ruled against CXMT. But if you have seen a hyperscale qualification complete, or a teardown that puts CXMT's cell size closer to SK Hynix than the reported node numbers suggest, drop it in the comments. That is the round most likely to be rescored, and the argument that would change it is specific enough to verify. If the next round changes the verdict, this channel scores it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch it when it does.